Welcome to another edition of Heavy Hands. We are very, very excited on this week's episode, not only because we now have two lineal heavyweight champions not named John Jones running around the division, the 205-pound division in the UFC, not only because our shared pick of Dominic Reyes was right in every eye except those of the judges, but because we are joined once again by a very special guest. I don't know, Tom. Do you think, are you an honorary member, ruled out by age, perhaps, of the vaping scooter gang?
I'm not sure how you know I'm old, but yes, you are correct. I am old.
Your voice sounds like Pat's used to. You sound professional and adult. It's a giveaway.
Yeah, fair enough. I would say I'm an honorary member. Have you ever seen Old School?
Yes.
So I'm basically blue.
Well, anyway, that is the voice of Tom Elliott. You may know him from Twitter as Tommy Elliott, as Moy Cowboy. You may also know him from work on the Fight Site and, of course, some work on BloodyElbow.com, including a very recent series he put out, I think, in December. That was a series basically breaking down the stages of development in the career of John Jones, and including, his strengths, how he's changed over time, some of his deficiencies, and the styles he struggles against. And what better person to bring on to discuss John Jones's second consecutive unsuccessful title defense. At UFC 247, as I already noted, John Jones got beaten by Dominic Reyes, only to win on one judge's scorecards 4 of the 5 rounds. We'll get into some discussion, I'm sure, of the scoring, but nonetheless, it was a really interesting contest. In fact, I think in a lot of ways, UFC 247 over-delivered. It certainly exceeded a lot of my expectations. It was a pretty shit card on paper, to be honest, and a lot of these fights and fighters overperformed. So, and we're joined, of course, as always, by my co-host, Evil Greg Jackson. Phil McKenzie. Sorry, I'm just calling people by their Twitter handles now, Phil.
Thank you, Valentina, for saving that card. Our beautiful, blonde, dancing queen knocked out Caitlin Chukagian and
I'm cutting your
managed to make what looked like a pedestrian card pretty awesome.
It could have been a lot. Everything that could have been bad wasn't nearly as bad as it could have been. All right, I don't want to give Valentina.
Except Louis Latifi, that was pretty bad.
It was still pretty funny. I mean, what was it ever going to be? I enjoyed it. Anyway,
it was exactly what I expected.
Yeah, it was.
I loved it.
It was a heavyweight fight. It was fine. Okay, so before we get into anything else in UFC 247, after an extremely disjointed and unfocused introduction, par for the course for this show, let's go ahead and dive into the main event. John Jones, Dominic Reyes. Tom, I am clearly going insane the longer I talk, so could you start us off? Give us your thoughts on this fight. If you want to touch on the decision, that is at your discretion. But overall, what did you expect going in? What did you make of the performances of both Reyes and Jones?
Yeah, thanks, Connor. So I started to put together an article, a preview article on this, and I didn't get it published in time, unfortunately. But essentially what I wrote down reviewing this fight, reviewing all of Jones's fights, Reyes' fights, I thought Reyes had the physical tools to really bother Jones. I mean, obviously a tall, rangy guy, though surprisingly short-legged for his height. The man is all torso. Mm-hmm. But reasonably good footwork for a light heavyweight. Doesn't throw himself off balance every time he punches. Mm-hmm. The bar is low in the heavier weight divisions. Very good kicker. And obviously kicking with Jones is something that's extremely important. You have to be able to challenge him at that range or he will just eat you up and win an easy unanimous decision. So there were a lot of things on Reyes' side going into this fight. But my prediction was actually that John Jones would win. And the reason that I thought he would win is because I think to beat John Jones, the best way to do it, the easiest way to do it is to be a Thiago Santos type, where you're going to come forward with power. You're going to kick with him. You're going to kick hard. But you're not going to let him settle into a long-distance kickboxing match where he can just pop you with little kicks and then poke you in the eyes as he long guards his way out of your pressure.
Mm-hmm.
You really have to be fairly fearless and just come in after him, put combinations together, and really expose the fact that his defense is very, very shallow past the first strike. He has almost no layers to his defense and relies tremendously on length. And I didn't really think Reyes was going to be able to do that because while Reyes has, again, a good kicking game and a killer counter left, he's not historically been much of a combination puncher.
Mm-hmm.
And I was very worried that he was simply going to throw one shot at a time. Jones would back away, stiff arm him away, kick him a few times, and just win easily like that. So I was actually pretty impressed with Reyes' ability to land those single shots because he really didn't throw a lot of combinations.
No,
but he landed good kicks. He landed a lot of those single shots. A lot of that was facilitated by the fact that John Jones was really walking towards him the whole time and pressuring in a way that he doesn't always do, putting Reyes on the back foot. But at the same time, that gave Reyes the ability to hit some of those counters, to get John sometimes as he was moving in. I think the dynamic was about what I expected, other than John Jones's pressure being very consistent. And I thought Reyes performed well, and I did think he won the fight. I thought he won at least the first 3 rounds. I thought the 4th round was close, though I have no problem giving it to John.
Mm-hmm.
And John clearly won the 5th round. So was it a robbery? I hesitate to use that word because, to me, a robbery is a fight where it's not even close, and there's just no room for thinking that one fighter won versus the other.
Mm-hmm.
This was pretty close. I just don't see where you get 3 rounds for Jones in this. What were your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I first of all, I wouldn't know anything about planning to write an article before an event and not getting it done quite soon enough. But
perish the thought.
If I can imagine, for example, a hypothetical article I may have been working on leading up to this event, then it would have made me look so fucking smart, dude. Because I agree with all of that. I was, people who listened to last week's episode know, like, I was also, and Phil agreed, we were both concerned about Reyes' lack of combinations. There were a lot of moments in this fight as it played out where Jones would land, or rather Reyes would land a clean shot, and if he had been able to follow it up with 1 or 2, not even full power, just put some quick relaxed punches behind the first clean connection, he would have really, really had Jones in trouble. So, that was a concern. But to me, this is the thing that, and now I'm writing a post-fight article, which also stands, knowing me, a strong chance of not actually being finished. But to me, the big thing that keeps recurring in my mind is the thought of just how effective counters really are against John Jones. I think the fact that Reyes can stand his ground, can change levels, slip a punch, block a punch, and come back with his feet rooted with an accurate, powerful shot means a lot. I think that was instrumental to how close the fight with Thiago Santos was. The difference being that Santos throws more combinations but is way wilder and less accurate.
Yes.
And Reyes is really able to stab John Jones with sharp, well-placed shots as he was coming in. I think Jones, the shallowness of his defense combines with the awkwardness of his punching mechanics in a really terrible way, to leave him extremely vulnerable every time he throws a punch. Likewise, the problem with that Phil and I have always raised with the Mike Winklejohn style of kickboxing, where you just sort of have like a little kickboxing wheel of fortune spinning in your head that just randomly selects something out of the grab bag of techniques, and you just cycle through, relying on like sheer variety. The problem with that is that all of these potential switch ups, they generally work great for someone with John Jones's reach against the vast majority of light heavyweights who can't compete at his range and who aren't comfortable getting past the end of his arms. But if you can answer the oblique kick and the stomp kick and the side kick and the high kick all with the same thing, i.e. by stepping off to the side and punching him in the face, then, there needs to be more substance there for that to be effective. And We didn't see much feinting from Jones in this fight. We saw some pretty abysmal cage-cutting footwork from Jones in this fight. We just didn't see any of like the ancillary skills that would have been needed to disguise his attacks and make him just a little less difficult to counter. And I think that played a really big part in how long it took him to build momentum. He really had to wait for Reyes to become exhausted before he started to really put his stamp on any of the rounds, or even on any like single minute of any rounds. So, Phil, what do you think?
Yeah, so I think there's basically things we thought we were going to see, and there's things that might have surprised us. And I think, in general, this was a really good one for us nailing the particular dynamics, both in what we were going to see and what could go wrong. So I think we mentioned that, Dominic Reyes doesn't look like he's tremendously able to keep the kind of pace that Jones does. I mean, I think this was a very impressive cardio performance nonetheless, even if he clearly faded. For his first 5-round fight, his 12th fight ever, I believe. And, just against someone who is as consistent and durable as John Jones, this was still, very impressive. It wasn't enough, but...
We saw an inkling of that in his fight with Oezdemir, too, where he was clearly very tired in the third round, a lot of intense pressure, but he still threw a lot in that third round. He can still fight well even when he's tired, which is a great quality to have.
Yep. We saw, I think we mentioned Jones's uncomfortable boxing against southpaws, and we really saw that in force. He was remarkably uncomfortable at throwing his hands in this fight. It really was, classic Jones at his worst of being unable to just do anything apart from use weird kicks to close the distance. And he really did just kind of boxcar Homer Reyes by just absorbing volume until Reyes was standing there so that he could start kicking him in the thigh again. I mean, he really, he is not comfortable throwing punches against southpaws because, like I said, he only has a left hand and he's not comfortable punching through open stance.
Yeah.
And sorry, go ahead, Phil.
No, you...
Please, Tom, go on.
So I listened to the show last week, and I thought your guys' take on the fight was very correct, and very close to mine as well. But one thing that you guys did talk about a little bit that I disagreed with was how much time John Jones would spend in an orthodox stance. Because he spends a lot of time as a southpaw, probably the majority of his time, though he switches constantly, so it's a little hard to tell. I actually thought he would spend the majority of this fight in orthodox because John Jones does a lot of things which are like ghetto Muay Thai, if that makes sense. So it's kind of Muay Thai-esque strategies, but things that he's figured out himself and doesn't do with any of the technical sophistication of an actual Thai fighter. And one of those is that he's a big kicker. He, say whatever you will about the man. He has a diverse kicking arsenal. He kicks quite hard, and he's one of the most consistent body kickers in MMA. And all that is facilitated by the fact that he almost always sets up the open stance matchup. And I thought in this one that he would do so, even knowing that it gave Reyes a matchup in which he was more comfortable, and where the body and head kick were clearly cleanly available to him as well. Though it might also have been the fact that every time he went orthodox, went southpaw, Reyes was chewing up his lead leg very effectively. In the open stance, John was actually doing a much better job than I would have expected checking some of those inside lead leg kicks. There was some very serious shin-on-shin contact throughout the early part of this fight. But he was not doing a good job checking the outside low kicks when he was going southpaw. So that could be a reason too. But to your point, Phil, yeah, his boxing is not great in southpaw, and it's even worse in orthodox, and it's even worse in orthodox against a southpaw opponent. So just very impotent from that position.
I mean, I think it's a dynamic of he's now developed two basic styles, from orthodox, and because he uses his orthodox as his Orthodox, I think, is his boxing stance. His fight against Gustafsson and, or apparently which should be pronounced Gustavsson.
Oh my God!
Which I've been doing incorrectly, apparently.
They're Swedes. They can handle it. All right, they're fine. Their life is perfect. Just they can have their names mispronounced.
But
also, it's Gustafsson's who
so
we're quite literally punching up by mispronouncing his name. Please go on, Phil.
So he was able to draw them onto, and I think he's also obviously more comfortable drawing people onto his strikes. But he was, a lot of the Gustafsson fight was him drawing Gustafsson on with the close stance jab to kind of out jabbing Gustafsson as he made him as he circled him around the cage, and then stepping across back into southpaw for the power change up with the big left hand or the left body kick. And I think he's reasonably comfortable with that change up against orthodox fighters. I don't know if I just don't think he has any plan against southpaws. None of that works anymore. The jab isn't there. The cross isn't there as much. This really did seem like him just throwing kicks until Reyes got tired.
I mean, we can talk all day. Some of these people listen to the show know. I know. I think most of the Vaping Scooter Gang boys do listen to this show. And they will know, as I've said many times before, I do tend to I start to get that contrarian tingle when they go really, really hard on Jones and how terrible the light heavyweight division is. It's such a meme at this point that you just can't rate him at all because his division is bad. But honestly, let's look at the way that he has been incubated and insulated by the level of competition in this division. How many southpaws are there among these challenges? There's OSP occasionally, especially after he had already broken his arm. There's Chael Sonnen. There's Vitor Belfort, who did essentially nothing on the feet and based his entire strategy around pulling guard and throwing up. And there's Lyoto Machida, who was the first man to win a round versus John Jones, who had considerable success and then basically just couldn't and probably never would be able to stop Jones's wrestling.
He got hit with Jones's first and last good right hand.
Yeah, which still was not a pretty punch.
Yeah, no.
So there's that. There's also just to my point about counterpunching being remarkably effective against Jones. How many people who can really consistently throw counterpunches has he ever faced? Honestly, Thiago Santos was one of the first people who consistently tried to swing when Jones just came in and committed to a strike. Right? Gustafsson's not a great counterpuncher. He rarely does it. Daniel Cormier sure is. Who are the counterpunchers here? Glover Teixeira?
I mean, it's Lyoto again.
It's Lyoto.
Yeah, and Machida.
So basically, to me, this fight was Dominic Reyes finishing what Lyoto Machida started, but definitely was not capable of finishing.
But I will say that a lot of people out there on the internet will say that John Jones isn't the greatest of all time because of things like his level of competition. They'll be like, oh, who I like Jose Aldo because he once put his lead foot down and then turned backwards on his other foot or something like that. But
were you describing a pivot just then?
Yeah, one of those stupid things. But this was, walking down, tanking damage, hoping that the other guy gets tired. This was a Jose Aldo performance.
God, I'm so close to cutting your mic. Tom, are you interested in a co-host position on Heavy Hands? That's what Jose Aldo performances will be from now on. Shut the... You're such a piece of shit.
You're just trying to hurt us.
Yes.
Right now. No, I will say that, unlike... I am by far the least harsh on Jones among my Vespa riding mango jewel huffing colleagues. That is... I think that John Jones is a very great fighter. And... you have to look, technically, is he Jose Aldo? Of course not. But he has come up with a style that is very well suited to his competition, that takes advantage of his insane physical proportions, and that, frankly, works very well. He's obviously beaten almost everyone he's faced pretty convincingly. His fight IQ is amazing. Mm-hmm. But I do think that, and I believe I wrote this in my article series on Bloody Elbow, I do think he's stagnated a lot. And I think that the lack, the way that his wrestling has atrophied in some ways has really hurt his creativity because it limits his options. And he's fallen into this style where really what he wants to do is he wants to keep you at very long distance. And then for you to close the distance, because he's so long, you have to dash across. And that gives him plenty of time to see what you're doing, trying to bridge the gap and suck you into his clinch. Now, his clinch has become less effective over the years. But it's still very dangerous. Mm-hmm. And he couldn't do this against Reyes because Reyes was hitting him with same time counters. He was long enough to kick him without having to bridge a big gap. And it simply just didn't give Jones the amount of time he needed to set up his responses. I think it was largely the same reason that the first Gus fight was so hard from him. That was the first person he fought who he could hit with an oblique kick, who could then punch him in the face before Jones's kicking foot was back on the mat.
Yeah.
And he really, really struggled. And you saw in this fight, he defaulted to sticking his arm straight out and running backwards.
Mm-hmm. There are often asterisks attached to Jones's less inspired performances. But again, like the reason I bring up the Lyoto Machida thing, and to second your point there, Tom, is that like a lot of what we saw here are just things that have always been weaknesses of John Jones's style. Every style has its foils, has its weaknesses, its effective counterparts. And, in some ways it is as simple as, can you compete with him at kicking range? Can you counter him when he throws single shots? Are you not obligated to chase after him? 'Cause if you're not, then Jones's style leaves opponents a lot of options. Opponents who are not completely intimidated or overwhelmed by his reach and the weird diversity of his offense. It leaves them a lot of options for what attacks they want to do, what direction they want to move. It's just it's I don't know. I thought it was Phil.
I want to touch on what Tommy said a bit, because he mentioned something interesting, which is that, John Jones has been extremely dominant against the people that he's fought. And there's something to be said for not actually getting too far ahead of the metagame of what your division and your competition is. Because a lot of the time when we analyze people, we analyze them as being, good or bad, as against not even just like a pound for pound metric, but we know what good technique and footwork and approach tools and so on. We have reasonably decent ideas of what this looks like by this point. But a lot of the time, like, developing that stuff is itself costly, not just in the sense of like it's takes a lot of effort, but then you will literally get beaten up learning how to do it.
Yeah.
Learning proper defense in MMA, you will get beaten up. You will literally spend time in the gym taking years off of your career.
We saw Lauren Murphy had a nice competitive performance with Andrea Lee on this card, and if you watch her career, her last few fights, she has just come out the other end of like a technical development sinkhole, where she had really seemed to have like neutered a lot of what used to make her style effective because she was trying to learn new skills. Like we see that all the time. People, as they try to stop stagnating technically, their performances in the cage kind of stagnate as a result.
Well, and to Phil's point, also to something that you said on the patron only episode when you were last week when you were talking about why heavyweights and light heavyweights are not so good, Connor. Defense is something that which actually I thought if anybody listening as a patron hasn't listened to that episode, you really should, because I think it's a much fuller explanation of your point.
Wow.
In that context, I agree with you completely.
Top guest, Tom. Suram comes on, plugs his own shit, plugs Danny Martin. You come on and plug the Patreon. I love you. Please go on.
Well, I'll plug us when we get to some of these later fights. Right. Don't worry. But in any case, one of the other things about defense is, to a certain extent, defense kind of has to get beaten into you, right? You pay attention in the gym to what is giving you the most consistent feedback of improving your performance in sparring. And if you're John Jones, who are you training with that can actually hurt you? Who are you training with that can make you have to care about defense?
Especially as Jackson Wink, especially as the team itself stagnates and diminishes. Who is
That's what I was going to say. I mean, since the brief period when Alistair Overeem was there, is there anybody at that gym who can conceivably push him in sparring? Is he even sparring that much? I mean, these are the questions I ask when I see his defense, because it just almost looks like he hasn't hardly practiced it until he gets in the cage, and that might literally be true.
Yeah, who is capable of beating anything into John Jones?
But to go back to like what I was saying, it's not just that you shouldn't. This is the thing: is that like long and dominant careers often come from being not too far above the metagame of your division. Like GSP managed to run for a long time without developing a right hand, because he just sat behind the left hand but behind his jab and his takedown. He was relatively risk averse in this way. He didn't develop deep combination boxing or a lot of nuance in his game that we might otherwise criticize from like a quote unquote modern perspective. But it made sense to do that. It gave him a longer career. Jones not developing defense in his own way, just sitting there, like he's not going to take the damage in the gym. He's just going to peck at people from miles away. It might literally have given him a longer career. Like the classic example of someone who had an incredibly safe, who had an incredibly safe style, for like preserving them from damage, is Ronda Rousey, because she finished everyone instantaneously.
Right. Yeah.
Like it was, but so this is the thing. Like a lot of the time when we want things from fighters, it is very costly for them to like actually build them out. A lot of the people that we see coming up now, we look at our Max Holloways and so on. They're leaving a lot more of themselves in the gym than someone like John Jones is, almost certainly.
Sure. You can't just download a patch to improve a fighter's game. There are costs. I totally agree with that. And somewhere in my, just to evaluate Jones's position in the light heavyweight division a little further, like somewhere still hidden in my heart is the technical purist I once was. But I'm old. I'm cynical. I've been beaten down by the world, and I now recognize that there is more to a fighter's greatness and standing and ability than technique. Phil, as you put it on Twitter yesterday, functional immortality is a really great asset to have. Like, I know Jones's technique, his division has not demanded more of him technically, and his training has not demanded more of him technically. Those are to some extent, inherent limitations of just being a bigger fighter. There are ways in which people just aren't going to push you. But, yeah, go on.
Sorry.
No, please.
So I think this is a trap that it's very easy for us to fall into as analysts. This is certainly something that I get in arguments sometimes with my fight site colleagues on, because, you fetishize people doing things the technically correct way. And so the fighters you think are the best are the guys who have the cleanest technique, who do the prettiest things. But that's not the entirety of what makes you a great fighter.
Right.
Danny Martin can't stand Daniel Cormier.
I haven't noticed. I think he's really subtle about it.
Yeah, he is. He's very subtle about it. But we had this argument. I promise I won't go on this tangent too long. But we had this argument about whether or not DC was a better fighter than Renato Moicano. Renato Moicano.
Uh-huh.
And my argument was, no, he's not. Renato Moicano is not a better fighter than DC, because while he does a lot more things technically correct within the realm of striking, he doesn't have that level of power. He doesn't have that level of durability. Mm-hmm. He doesn't have that level of athleticism relative to his competition. Mm-hmm. And while all these things are cheating, as we all know, they also matter a great deal in the cage.
Yes.
And I think similarly with John Jones.
Sorry, is this Danny Henry Cejudo's number one fan, Martin?
I'm glad I'm not the only one to notice the contrast there.
Wait,
okay,
you mean
I'll leave that one.
You mean flyweight Daniel Cormier? That's what I've been calling Henry Cejudo privately for months now. Anyway, go on, Tom.
Henry Cejudo succeeds on better attributes, even better attributes in much better divisions.
No. He's about to net a win over Jose Aldo due to superior striking technique.
Oh my god.
Uh-huh.
I just can't even.
you were saying.
You distracted me. You totally thrown me off now.
Yeah.
By making me think about Henry Cejudo fighting Jose Aldo when Peter Yan, Aljamain Sterling, and Corey Sandhagen all exist. Mm-hmm. No, in any case, you can talk a lot about technique, but at the end of the day, durability matters a lot. Athleticism and physicality matters a lot. And having a style that is tailored around those attributes when you possess them is not wrong and really should not diminish you as a fighter, even if it means that your game does not look as technically beautiful as somebody who does not have those same attributes and has to compensate for it by being technically excellent.
Right. There are intangible qualities when we determine a fighter's greatness. Fedor Emelianenko had his stylistic foils, and when he did overcome them, he overcame them because he was brilliant. I still believe that. He had incredible fight IQ, an incredibly adaptable skill set. He made really smart decisions against his more challenging opponents. George St. Pierre had this incredible diversity in his game. He could just figure out how to beat you in one phase and turn that into beating you in another phase. It may not always be as pretty, but like when John Jones has run up against his difficult matchups, the fact that he is unkillable, the fact that he doesn't get tired, the fact that he doesn't like lose focus or get discouraged ever from the overall plan of the fight, that he just stays in there working away. Like if you gave John Jones 10 rounds to beat, 10 rounds to work, no one would have ever even had any argument to beating him. He would have crushed everyone by the end of the fight. And that is an element of greatness. So, we talk about
Reyes a little bit. I mean, we're talking a lot about Jones, but I think there's some very interesting things to talk about what he did in his adaptation.
Please, it's going to be a long ass segment, folks, but this has been it was one of the most interesting fights, and the result did not make it any less interesting. Perhaps because it was sort of unsatisfying, because most of us agree the wrong guy won. But it's going to be a long segment for a very compelling fight. Tom, what would you like to say about Reyes' performance?
So I know we are getting pretty long in this segment, but a couple of things that really stood out to me. I was very impressed with the degree to which Reyes was able to neuter Jones in the clinch. Mm-hmm. And I actually thought that Jones did some better clinch things in this fight than he has in some of the past ones. There was a little bit of the creativity coming back in terms of gripping and framing, like how he was engaging in the clinch and how that was setting up his strikes. But at the same time, Reyes really just neutralized him in the clinch. Reyes is not very good if you get in on his hips at preventing the takedown. He's quite good at getting back up to his feet. But I really thought that when Jones crashed him to the cage and was actually able to engage in a clinch and didn't let him circle out, that's a place pre-fight I thought he could do some damage. And I was really impressed that Reyes did not let him do so. And I also thought Reyes came out like a house on fire. And his early volume was not something I would have expected, having seen some of his previous fights.
Mm-hmm. He took his opportunities when he did get Jones onto for a fight in which Jones spent so much time just sort of marching forward, not breaking stride or pace. Reyes did a really good job of taking advantage of the few opportunities when he did get Jones taking more than one step backwards in a row. The moment that Jones was allowing space, Reyes was eating it up and pushing him and making him uncomfortable. And I agree. I'm glad I mentioned it last week, so I don't look like I completely didn't see it coming. But I was also impressed with how Reyes performed in the clinch. Like, coming in, I knew he did a good job with his head position. I knew he just did a good job, like, staying upright and centered and denying his opponent angles in the clinch. I thought that was going to be effective, but he was really successful here, like framing Jones off, setting him up for strikes, and then using that as an opportunity to escape. Jones was, I do think his clinch is diminished. Again, like, this is a diminished Jones, but in many ways, Reyes is just a stylistic foil for him. These are things I think that would have always troubled Jones at any point in his career, things that his style was never designed to deal with. And even hanging with Jones in the clinch, even at this stage, I think should impress anyone. Phil, any thoughts on Reyes?
Yeah, I mean, I thought he did a better job than we've seen thus far of taking steam off his punches and throwing in combination. Like, as you said, particularly when he backed Jones up, he did, because, this big thing of Jones backing up quickly and reaching is that the automatic thing people do is charge at him and fall right into the clinch, where he either turns them off or just locks up with them. So it was nice to see him kind of chasing Jones, throwing non-committal shots into Jones's guard so that he could he could stay on him. Mm-hmm. He improved on his body work from previous fights.
Oh,
he
the
went
straight
to the
shots
body a
to
lot.
the body.
Yeah.
Beautiful anti-pressure tool, those straight shots to the gut.
And a beautiful, and a great move against someone who's just reaching and has really prioritizes head defense.
Sure, yeah.
Another thing, Jones has typically been in a division. He's been the all-terrain, like, damager in a division of headhunters. Mm-hmm. And so it was nice to see someone going to his body, even though it didn't do anything, because Jones is an immortal.
Yeah.
What else? Yeah, I mean, and just setting a good pace. Admittedly, one that he couldn't keep, but that's something that he can take for next time.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it did nothing. Like, this has become a little more of a habit for Jones, but Reyes, if he had any effect at all, then he successfully kept Jones to a very consistent and relatively low output. Like, this is a fight in which Jones threw like 30 shots around on average, like right around that mark each time. Every round was like exactly the same. So Reyes definitely prevented Jones from taking over or building momentum in any way.
I will say that I did not think Jones looked disinterested, or that this was a. No? I thought that the Santos fight, I did think Jones was in a lower gear.
Yeah.
Like, in this one, I just felt that for pretty much the first three rounds, like, with the exception of like the end of the third, I felt like Jones just kind of didn't have answers. But he was, it was noticeable. He threw about twice as many strikes as he threw against Thiago Santos.
Mm-hmm. Jones is like a cat. He gets bored when like the mouse is like in a total state of shock and just lies there still. Like, the more resistance you put up, I think the more you provoke out of him. The more pressure, the more aggression.
Yeah, I really think that Santos knee injury. Sorry to interrupt. I really think that Santos knee injury made it difficult for Jones to focus on that fight in the way he should have, even as he was losing it.
Yep, I 100% agree. I think he was reading the body language, and he was just like, yeah, I'm that same incredible focus that he can maintain was, I think, in some ways his worst enemy in that fight, because he was just like, yeah, look at this guy stumbling all over the cage and I'm still here. And
yeah,
even though he was getting tagged a bunch. But yeah, I mean, even this, as you guys said in this cage, this fight, I ended up, I think, because I expected him to lose this fight, I actually ended up just impressed by John Jones. His will to win is still just absolutely incredible. I mean, this is, I think, why Reyes was happy to, seemed relatively happy with the decision at the end, because Jones had simply just convinced him that he wanted it more by the end. Like if you looked at that and you were like, who's mentally defeated at this point? It was Reyes far more than it was Jones.
Certainly.
Like,
by the last minute, Reyes was visibly demoralized.
Yeah, he was just like, I can't do anything to this guy. He just will not go away.
Like I said, one more round, Jones probably would have finished Reyes. Like, he is an inevitable kind of fighter. It's a quality that just can't really be replicated.
Yeah, I mean, he is still one of the most remarkably talented, like, all-round fighters we've ever seen. Like, still an undeniably incredibly great fighter. Mm-hmm. And, you know, as I think Luca Bourdon said, he's it's not that he's a bad fighter. It's that he could have been like he could have been even greater. He could have been something incredible.
But also, you never know. As you said, there are always trade-offs and costs.
Yeah.
If you're to develop a different style, you never know. Like, just to reinforce one of your points, I never try to use stats to make an argument, but to back up an argument. I don't think there's ever been another Jon Jones fight where I've seen these particular numbers. They have on Fight Metric or UFC Stats, which is phenomenal SEO. They have landed by target statistics. For Jones, he landed 29% of his shots to the head in this fight, 28% to the body, 41% to the leg. I think that sounds pretty representative of the game that Jones plays. He attacks all levels all the time. It's one of the best aspects of his game. For Reyes, 35% to the head, 41% to the body, and 23% to the leg. He essentially matched Jones for the variety of his output. For whatever, as limited as it may be, Jones's defense really, really prioritizes protecting his head, and whatever good his reach may do him, I thought Reyes was a strong example to any future challengers or to himself in a rematch of just how far you could really go against Jon Jones by diversifying your attack. Take away the effectiveness. Like, for a shallow defense, it's still remarkably effective because Jones has a freakish frame. So do what you can, take the targets that he gives you, and you too can be robbed in Texas. All right, let's wrap it up there. We're at 43 minutes improbably. So I'm just going to go ahead and cut out all the stuff Phil said. Since I spent a good bit of time just reiterating his points anyway, I think we have it covered. When we come back, the rest of UFC 247, and I should have noted this earlier, but we will also be talking about next week's fights, which are a lot more interesting if you talk about them in a SpongeBob voice, which is what we're going to do in segment 3. After this.
Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it.
All right, welcome back to Heavy Hands. We are continuing through the UFC 247 lineup here. I hesitate usually to call the co-main event of any card the undercard, but let's be honest. Compared to Jones-Reyes, we're on to the undercard at this point. Valentina Shevchenko versus Caitlin Chookagian. I seem to recall last week essentially saying my expectation for this fight. Usually, Phil, when we have like what we would call a two true outcome fight, it means that each person has a chance of winning in some way. This was a two true outcome fight in that, depending on how Caitlin Chookagian responded to the first few hard shots she took, she could have lost it in an intensely boring way, or she could have lost it by being crushed. And thankfully, seriously enhancing the viewing experience for everyone at what could have been the lowest point of the card, she chose to get crushed. And that's about it. What do you have to say, Phil?
Yeah, I mean, it's a dark thing to go out there and want a nice person to just get obliterated. But
I'm a dark person, and I
Yeah,
don't
it
mean
was
that the way
kind of-
you usually mean it.
yeah, it was. Damn you! It was one of those ones where I was kind of glad to see Shevchenko get Chukagian out there early, partially because it was a bit of a mercy killing. I think there's a couple of like checks Shevchenko runs through when she's fighting people.
Mhm.
First, she's like, "Am I faster than you?" And you could see her doing that in the striking exchanges with the low kicks and the check right hook.
Mhm.
And then she said, they got into the clinch, and she said, "Am I stronger than you?" And if she passes both of these checks, I think she's happy to beat people up.
Yes, she will smash you.
And yeah, so she did, and it was over. Hooray!
Yep. Tom, anything to add?
Yeah, in my prediction at the fight site was that Chukagian's perfectly fine as a mid-range kickboxer, but that she had absolutely no chance in this fight, and that I think was not a stretch in any way. Everybody thought that, and everybody was right. The first time you saw Chukagian throw a 1-2 and Val come back with a hook, I mean, just the sheer difference in speed was stunning. The degree to which Valentina Shevchenko just clearly felt absolutely no threat from Chukagian at any point in this fight made it almost difficult to watch sometimes. Yeah, I mean, I think in my notes for this is that Valentina might be the first person I've ever seen actually cross-check a body kick in MMA, which is actually quite a risky thing to do if you're worried at all about the person faking it or shooting on you or anything else.
Mm-hmm.
She was just playing with her, and then in the third round, to Phil's point, she felt superior enough in every way that she was perfectly fine putting her out, and that was it. And frankly, now they're probably going to feed her Roxy, and I'm not looking forward to that at all. I don't know if I'll even watch it.
What are our options? They're gonna feed either Roxy or Lauren Murphy to Valentina Shevchenko, two lovable, hardworking, completely outmatched flyweights. Like neither of whom has a ghost of a chance. It's kind of soul crushing to me. I don't know. The thought makes me very sad. I guess this one kind of makes me sad too. Like, I like Chukagian. I like her style, especially as she's gotten a little more confident and started to kind of feel her power a bit and step in and keep her eyes open and exchange with people in the pocket a little more often. I already liked her before, even though she had some boring fights. She's really grown though. And
yeah, I thought with Calderwood was good. She's obviously come a long way under Mark Henry, but there is no world in which she ever has the athletic capability to compete with Valentina Shevchenko.
Yeah, and I remember getting very mildly dragged for this after her fight with Joanna Jacek, whom, as everyone knows, I am a big fan, an even bigger fan now that she's outed herself as a virulent racist. But I remember saying, like, wow, I didn't realize leading into this fight just how much of a physical beast Valentina Shevchenko is.
The home fight.
The home fight, sure. Like, being able, as someone who is now a perfectly normal-sized looking flyweight, being able to compete physically in any way with Holly Holm should have tipped me off to that. Holly Holm, a big and a very physical fighter. But the Jacek fight, it was just like, wow. There were a lot of ways in which Joanna could compete, and it just didn't show. Because anything she landed did not have the snap that Shevchenko's shots had. Anytime they tied up, she was just ragdolled. And basically, like, that impression just continues to be reinforced. Like, to reiterate what we said at the end of our, or, near the end or somewhere in the nebulous middle of our John Jones, Dominic Reyes discussion, there is more to fighting than technique. And not only is Valentina Shevchenko very technical, she's technical in sort of a GSP way. She has a pretty narrow lane she plays in. There's only like a half dozen techniques she consistently employs. She does not take the lead. She knows exactly what she wants to do, so she doesn't really step out of her comfort zone. she's still very technical, but in addition to that, she's just an incredible athlete, and there is no one at this weight who can even come close to competing with her. And I hate to say, as a technique guy, that like what made her 2 fights with Amanda Nunes so close and difficult was the fact that Amanda Nunes is also a plus athlete, but that's a big part of it.
Oh yeah,
and you know, I would love to say that technique really matters, but we just saw Caitlin Chukagian, a fairly good technical, intelligent kickboxer, get completely smoked. We saw Ioane Jędrzejczyk, a significantly better both athlete and technical striker, also get completely dominated. So, like, that's basically it. Shevchenko is going to sit on this throne until someone with anything like comparable athleticism comes along. So I will reiterate the point I raised like a year ago at this point and say that I am waiting for the day that Tatiana Suarez can no longer make strawweight. And that'll be the day that I actually become interested in a potential Shevchenko fight.
I would like to see Jessica Andrade. I don't think she would win even do particularly well, but I think it would actually be pretty entertaining.
Mm-hmm. I co-sign that. You basically just need a physical freak. That's
how do y'all think Zhang would do against?
No, that's not bad.
Go.
I think she would have a real shot, especially because she can compete at kicking range like Nunes. She can throw powerful kicks. She's agile.
Be interesting.
Yeah, it could potentially be a very boring fight because Zhang might be really wise to try to draw Shevchenko into leading, but we know that doesn't really happen. So, but yeah, basically, like, sad as it is, there are technical holes in Shevchenko's game, but no one that she has been fighting is within sniffing distance of her physically, and so it's a barrier. You just don't get to see those technical gaps exposed. All right, well, that's the co-main event. It went exactly as literally everyone expected it to. Let's move on. We're not going to talk about Justin Tafa versus Juan Adams. I enjoyed seeing Jack Slack on Twitter the other day, where someone was saying, I just know that I want to hear Jack talk about Tafa versus Adams, but I know he'll skip it because it's an undercard heavyweight fight, sad face. And Jack just retweeted to say, that's right. Good on you, Jack. I support your beliefs 100%. Let's talk about featherweights instead. Dan Ige, Mirsad Bektic. I think a lot of us were looking at this as a sort of referendum on where Mirsad Bektic is, how he is either continuing or failing to continue to develop as a young fighter. Tom, what were your thoughts coming in, and did it surprise you in any way?
So I would say this fight was a bit of flew under the radar a bit for me because I really had not watched that much footage on Dan Ige prior to this, but I was very impressed with what I saw from him. I thought his hands looked very nice. The fundamentals of his boxing were absolutely there. He was dirty boxing well against a very powerful opponent in the clinch like Bektic. Very good striking position in the clinch, framing off very well. Very clear that his clinch was designed to strike and not necessarily to wrestle. You know, a lot of intentionality there. Good body work. So I was really happy with what I saw from Ige. Pretty nice scrambles on the ground at a couple points. I think what was really interesting for me about this fight was really as a referendum on Bektic.
Yeah.
He obviously one of the excellent athletic prospects to come into the UFC in some time and hasn't performed up to that potential. Recently made a move to TriStar, if I recall correctly.
Yep.
Which I thought might be really good for him, considering the facility that they're able to give wrestlers to dominate fights. And Bektic, obviously a powerful wrestler. But what I took from this the most with Mirsad is that his approach on the ground, I think, is fundamentally wrong for MMA. And what I mean by that is if you watch this fight, Bektic was able to complete several takedowns and spend a fair amount of time on top. But he threw almost no strikes when he was on top. He was doing an excellent job holding Ige down and advancing position. His half guard passing looks like something that you would see in a submission grappling match. I mean, it was very good and much better than you see most MMA fighters do. Mm-hmm. But the problem was he wasn't scoring. And his submission attempts were not sufficiently deep to steal the rounds, in my opinion. And it just went to show that you cannot approach an MMA fight in a grappling context as if it is a jiu-jitsu match where just dominating position and threatening submissions is going to win for you. Because if the other guy lit you up, even landed just a few hard shots before that, and you take him down and you don't hit him back,
right,
he should still win that round. And I thought that Bektic, I don't know if he would have taken the fight, but if he had mixed in a lot more damage on the ground with his passing attempts, with his positional controls, I think it would have been a lot closer than it actually was in my eyes, at least.
If you're holding someone down without hitting them, you're not doing MMA. Like,
you're not.
That is the thing. That is the phase that is almost wholly unique to MMA. That is MMA in my mind. Is ground and pound is like the defining phase of this sport, and it changes everything about grappling. Here's like a sort of a dual question for you, because that's an interesting point I hadn't really considered, but now that I think of it, that has been a bit of a shift for Bektic. So that's one prong of the question, is that Bektic was not always like that. I'm interested to hear your thoughts on whether Ige was doing something to necessitate such a sort of neutered top position, but Bektic was early in his career a terror on top of people, absolutely crushed people that allowed him to take top position, just battered them with strikes. And as recently as the Darren Elkins fight, he was absolutely destroying Elkins with ground and pound. So do you think, what do you think might be responsible for that shift? And then, not to suggest an answer necessarily, but could it be related to TriStar as a team? Because I realize these are in many ways declining fighters, but George St. Pierre, who also used to be a terrific ground and pound artist, one of the best ever, was outstruck from the bottom in his fight with Michael Bisping. Rory McDonald used to have terrific ground and pound, and we haven't seen that from him in ages, even in performances like the first fight with Douglas Lima, where he has spent long periods of time on top. Has TriStar become too much of just a pure jiu-jitsu gym? Because I've certainly noticed a heavy focus on bringing in lots of high-level sport jiu-jitsu players into that gym over the last 2 or 3 years.
And knee bars.
And leg locks, baby. So what do you think about that, Tom?
Got to carry the torch for the Imanari role. That was Tony Ferguson, not a TriStar. That's
right.
That would be like a buddy comedy to Tony Ferguson and Faraz Salami just falling over the camera. There might be something to that. I hadn't thought of that, Connor, but I think that's a really good point, because you did see that a lot in GSP's career.
Yeah.
He became very risk averse when he was on top. TriStar does prioritize control. When you think about the things that they're really good at, like what are the two things, at least for me, that I associate with TriStar? They all jab really well, very active lead hands. They control the fight with the jab, control the distance very well. And then takedowns, especially reactive takedowns, and then top control on the ground. So, yeah, a lot of risk aversion there. That might be it. It might be that Bektic is just getting to the point where at TriStar he feels like, I'm on top. The main thing is to stay on top, go for the sub. Even the submission attempts that he went for, he didn't give up position. Yeah. So the closest I think he came on a sub, if I recall correctly, was maybe an arm triangle in I think the second round.
He didn't even go to side control to try to put more pressure on it. He stayed in mount because I don't know, it just seemed like he wanted to just stay in what he felt was the most secure position. And
that's a red flag. If you're Alexei Oleinik, maybe you finish that because you've got this ridiculous squeeze. But for most of the population, you're going to go to side control right away if you're really trying to finish that, because the squeeze is not what finishes an arm triangle. What finishes an arm triangle is turning towards the guy's head, moving your body towards the guy's head and trying to get more and more perpendicular with your opponent's body, because that's what actually forces his own shoulder into his carotid artery, which is half the choke, right? So trying to finish it from mount, it's very, very hard. And that, to me, was very wrong-headed, and an indication that maybe he wasn't even trying to finish it that hard.
It's about sort of collapsing like the built-in frame that is the shoulder, right? Like popping that shoulder up out of its resting position so that it presses against the artery. You can't just do that by squeezing.
Yeah, it's very, very hard. Well, and the rotation also drives your shoulder up under your opponent's arm in such a way as to increase the pressure. And that's very hard to replicate just squeezing from mount.
Phil, you had something to say?
Yeah, I think like Bektic is a guy who he's not really a natural fighter. Is that a terrible thing to say?
No, he's not. He's not. We picked Ige for scrappiness, if that's the quality you're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, I thought he actually did. I thought I was genuinely impressed by in two ways. Firstly, that Ige came out looking so good and so fearless, and that he was able to immediately, like, on a hair trigger counter, like, some of any kind of lazy jabs that Bektic went from. Bektic was immediately fighting for his life in this fight in a way which I did not expect. I expected at least that, Bektic I did come around to Connor's way of thinking. I had to pick Bektic. I'd already picked Bektic, but by the time the fight rolled around, I was just like, he's not winning this one. But I thought Ige's striking looked great. I was impressed by the way that Bektic went out in the second, and he actually fought really aggressively. He started throwing his hands more again, and that really opened up the takedown for him, because he was getting takedowns and ground exchanges in the first round, but they weren't he wasn't able to build anything off it, but he got a really clean shot after forcing Ige backwards with punches. But I think that was him fighting against himself. Because in the third round, he was kind of done doing that kind of thing. He wasn't trying to, throw combinations to draw Ige into overcommitting, like trying to swing back at him. He was just backing away and looking for the double leg in a way which, was a little bit familiar, seeing as, we've seen it from both Rory Mack and Alex Garcia. It was a little TriStar, but I think it's unfortunate thing that TriStar is a gym where I think if that's in you, it will be exacerbated. Because there's guys like, they've obviously got Nasrat Hakparas, for example. I don't think he's ever going to do that. He's a madman.
Right.
But yeah, so, I mean, I think Ige's looking great. I think Bektic, I thought he showed guts, but I honestly think he might want to consider retiring. Because Ige is someone who's been fighting about the same amount of time as him, is about as old as him, is less athletic than him, and just overtook him. This sport has a lot of hurt waiting for Mr. Bektic.
Yeah, I won't advise retirement just yet. I'm not going to go completely full. Oh no, I'm blanking on his name. Who's the guy who got Ricky Hatton with Nassim Hamed or whatever? Or no, who was it? Who was Nassim Hamed talking about when he said, I think he should finish. I think he should retire.
I have no idea.
Damn it.
Yeah, I don't know where this.
I'm on the wrong show for boxing memes. I'm not going to advise retirement for Bektic just yet. Mostly because I do think we just talked about the costs of developing new skills, how fighters go through phases where they are learning a new way of, in many ways changing your technical, changing your skill set can be like learning a new way of thinking about fighting. And there can be a prolonged adjustment period in which things really aren't clicking. So I'm not going to completely overlook the possibility that could be happening to Bektic since this recent move to TriStar. But until I see him turn a corner, it does really feel like he's kind of Phil Davising himself. Like he is developing in such a way that has disconnected what used to be so impressive about his game. Where the back foot jab centric boxing he tried to play against Ige early, not only did it just invite the pressure and invite the exchanges that Bektic is so loath to avoid, that he used to dissuade by throwing hard combinations at people. It didn't set him up for his style of wrestling either, because Tom pointed out that TriStar is really good at building reactive takedowns into people, but Bektic earlier was not a reactive. I mean, he could hit a reactive shot for sure, but he would set you up with pressure. He would make you react to a threat and then get in on your hips, get you against the fence in particular. I think that the sort of reticence and top control is was a particularly bad choice here. Like, I don't know if he's worried about gassing himself out like he did against Darren Elkins, just pounding away at someone on bottom, but especially against Dan Ige, who also has a tendency to gas by round 3, just like Bektic, and who definitely did in this fight. Both guys were seriously diminished by round 3. I don't see why Bektic... Like, it would have made sense to try to put as much damage as possible, especially after that first round, once you get Ige down. And yeah, so I don't know. I think I'm not ready to write him off altogether, but I think it's pretty clear that when Bektic came out in round 2, he was basically replicating the style that he started with when he first came to the UFC. Pressure, combinations, forcing someone backwards, and setting up the shot. And that worked beautifully. And then for much of rounds 1 and 3, he was much more on the back foot, working behind the jab, and it just didn't work for him. So it may yet prove to be successful for him, but at the moment, it's a style that is not really yielding results for Mirsad Bektic.
Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are 1 or 2 of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. And you can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show.
Okay, let's move on to the most important fight on the main card. Derek Lewis versus Ilir Latifi. This was Latifi's UFC heavyweight debut. I believe he's had heavyweight fights before. Pretty sure. But, you know, I have to admit I was interested mostly because I wanted to see Derek Lewis, who, by the way, have you guys heard, like, he apparently has some kind of, like, life-threatening medical issue happening?
I just saw that today. Yeah, I didn't read the details.
Yeah, like, he was advised not to fight, so, I don't know. Thoughts go out to Derek Lewis. That made me very concerned. I don't know what's going on with him, but I hope he's all right. But I was mostly interested to see Derek perform here. I didn't really expect much out of Latifi, and coming away from it, I found myself, like, actually pretty encouraged about how Latifi might perform as a heavyweight going forward. I don't think he looked bad. He certainly looked fucking durable. He took Derek Lewis's shots better than he could take Ryan Bader's. Maybe wonder about how much he might have been cutting to make 205. So he came in at a very, shall we say, healthy-looking 245 or so for this matchup. Phil, what did you think of it?
Yeah, I mean, that was basically my takeaway. I think, yeah, Latifi definitely looks much... I think he looked good for heavyweight in 2 ways. Yeah, he could take shots better, and he has I think he showed a better gas tank than we've seen most of the time at light heavyweight, seeing as he was spending the whole time fighting against a bigger and probably even stronger man. He still kind of ran out of puff at the end of it, but
he wrestled Derek Lewis. That is very, very important. He wrestled Derek Lewis insistently and didn't get tired until didn't get really tired until the end of the final round.
So yeah, I mean, it's good for Latifi. This means he can have silly, funny fights against heavyweights, and that hopefully they will be funnier than this. This still wasn't funny enough. But yeah, he can fight other people, and heavyweight wrestling is even worse than light heavyweight wrestling for the most part. So hopefully he can, but I want to see him do more silly throws and less just body lock takedowns and stuff. Silly throws and chokes and funny things.
Yeah, more funny, Ilir. Come on. Jesus Christ, man, what are you doing? Tom, do you have any thoughts on Latifi's wrestling game and how it might translate to heavyweight in a way that maybe it didn't at light heavyweight?
You know, I was actually very impressed by Latifi's wrestling, mostly because, look, Latifi's obviously an extremely, extremely powerful guy, but I had serious concerns about his ability to muscle Derek Lewis at all, to finish those takedowns up against the cage, and whether or not doing so, if he was able to, would completely gas him out the first time he did it.
Right.
So I was pretty impressed that he was actually able to stay in there and grind Lewis a bit and get some takedowns, and actually fling him at one point bodily across the ring, across the cage.
That was good.
Oh my gosh! Like, how powerful is this man?
Right.
The Horse Lord. He's not to be trifled with.
His power was unlocked.
No, I think it was. I think that he would probably do a little bit better if he did spend less time grinding up against the cage, or at least use those shots that push his opponents to the cage to land more damage. I think on the mat, he actually kind of had the opposite problem of Mirsad Bektic, which was that when he did have Lewis down and had established position, that he was throwing too much unimportant volume that wasn't really scoring highly. When Lewis's lack of ground game would have really allowed him to pass half guard pretty easily. I think almost any time when he was in Lewis's half guard, he could have passed without too much trouble and gotten him out and maybe really made something of it.
Do you want to pass Lewis's half guard? Is it sometimes better to just keep one of those legs entangled? Because if you mount Lewis, I don't know if he could have done it against Latifi, given how strong he looked, but he does have a particular habit of bench pressing people out of top position.
Yeah, Lewis is very good at just standing up.
Right.
But I attribute a lot of that to the fact that most heavyweights don't know how to hold top position.
Okay, fair enough.
So, would that have happened to Latifi? I don't know. Obviously, a credentialed wrestler and a guy who knows how to stay on top. But who knows? Who knows on that one? That might have been why he didn't pass, is because he could feel Lewis was ready to get out if he had, and so he just landed what volume he could. That's entirely possible. These things can only be judged by feel. You have to be one of the two men in there, so who knows?
Yeah, I think that was definitely why both Bektic and Latifi stayed on top, because they were they were just thinking, I can't let this guy up. I think Latifi because he was like, because this guy's so strong, and Bektic because he was just like, this guy's too squirrely, and he's just won't go away when he's on the feet. And so it would have been, I think specifically when he was going to pass, Lewis was waiting to just do that thing where he would go for one leg and then just stand up on all fours and then get to the feet. I mean, obviously he did that against Daniel Cormier, and Cormier insta-RNC'd him.
Yeah.
But whilst Latifi can do the submission, it's not so much the jumping on the back kind, even though I also would have liked to see that. It would have been great to watch. It would have been like a extreme enactment of Man Black versus Fezzik from The Princess Bride.
The Man in Black versus Fezzik. Yes, that would have been fun. I guess the last thing I'll say before we move on from this fight is a brief little bit of like a lazy meta analysis, which is that clinch takedowns I think work really well at heavyweight. I think that makes, like, seeing it in action here against Derek Lewis, it made me realize how many people have really burned themselves out, not purely by wrestling Lewis, but by stalling out against the cage, trying to fish for a shot against Lewis, trying to take his legs out from under him, despite his awful stance and everything else. It's a lot harder than it looks just to counteract his weight once he's able to drape just a little percentage of that weight over your back. Finishing that shot becomes monumentally more difficult.
If you look at the guys who have a lot of consistent success at heavyweight taking people down, so just to throw three out there, so Daniel Cormier earlier in his career in his Strikeforce run primarily, Stipe Miocic, and I'll go with Cain Velasquez too. One of the things that they have in common is they tend to shoot. They do attack the legs, but they tend to shoot a lot higher. They go for a lot of high crotches and outside singles where their hands are locked very high under the thigh. They may not even do a full level change to enter the shot. And to me, that's so much safer than trying to shoot in on a deep double leg, because just the energy of carrying someone like Derek Lewis on top of you as he half sprawls up against the cage, even if you eventually finish the shot, it's just, you can't do that at heavyweight. The gas tanks are not there.
Yeah, Stipe and Kane are, I've always called it a snatch single. They're snatch single guys. They reach down and pick your leg up off the ground rather than trying to get underneath your base. Less effort in finishing, more efficient at this weight because, as Dominic Cruz is fond of pointing out, it makes sense to make big guys stand on one leg. They just can't balance that well compared to the smaller guys. And especially as you just said, Tom, like if there's a risk of getting either completely or even partially sprawled out, that's bad at heavyweight. It's exhausting. Even when no one has good top control, a lot of heavyweights still get to spend a lot of time in top position once they get it, just by virtue of gravity. There's a great Fedor Emelianenko seminar that you should watch. This was also Fedor's approach to wrestling at heavyweight. He was a big-time clinch wrestler. He could shoot, but he was all about the clinch, really. And not only because it blended with his striking, but because it was less energy expenditure and just more efficient overall to prefer takedowns that have little risk of putting you underneath a bigger man. So I thought Latifi looked great, to be honest. I'm excited to see what else he can do at heavyweight. Again, our thoughts go out to Derek Lewis. I hope the man's okay. I really don't want to lose one of the greatest fighting memes there's ever been in the cage. So I hope that he recovers from whatever's going on. Okay, we may have to run through the rest of this undercard relatively quickly, but there are several things of note to mention. Phil, I'm going to let you take the lead on Trevin Giles versus James Krause.
Not much to say other than James Krause is the man.
Yes.
He is as I said on Twitter, he is a career lightweight, mostly, who took a 24-hour step up against a goddamn middleweight and
former light heavyweight.
Yeah, and would have finished him if Trevin Giles had a neck. And weirdly enough, like not in the way that most people like in MMA don't have necks, in that they have like really thick necks that go into their shoulders. He just has a really short neck, and it just seemed really hard for James Krause to get under there. But other than that, he had like a gutsy performance. Trevin Giles still needs, in some ways, this was the perfect fight for him. Yeah. I think it was a great learning fight for him because he still has no defense anywhere and super like he's just clearly thrilled with all the offense he can throw. He's just like, look at this is great.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's just gotten him into trouble. This was 3 hard rounds against about the craftiest veteran he could ever think of. I mean, James Krause is tremendous fun to watch. I've always enjoyed like his weird mix of like this funky, like long jabbing game and foot sweep takedown into RNC and like step knees and stuff. He's got this wonderfully like eccentric functional game. And it really I think it was just like it's going to be a great learning experience for Giles as well.
I hope so. If he has any self-awareness or good coaches, like surrogate self-awareness through his coaches, then he should realize that without the weight and athletic advantage he so clearly enjoyed in this matchup, he absolutely would have lost. Like you could make a strong argument that he did lose.
I mean, the margin of error might literally just have been James Krause having a training camp. I mean, James Krause strikes me as he is a coach. He strikes me as a man who prepares very specifically for his opponents.
Yes.
But yeah, he's a G, and I'm glad they got fight of the night for this, right?
I don't know, but they sure as hell should have. It was an, as I said on Twitter, an inspirational performance from James Krause. Like, I get a lot into technical shit, but people who know me and my taste in fighting know that I care about like narrative and drama. That is, at the end of the day, that's the hook of fighting. That's the reason to watch. You appreciate the technical shit to like deepen your enjoyment and enable you to enjoy things where there's not a bunch of high drama. But not only were there some great technical ideas in this fight, particularly from James Krause, but it was like, it was a fucking triumph of will. It was, I don't know, seeing a human do an incredible thing like that, that to me is the main reason to watch fighting. So I found James Krause's performance really, really satisfying, even though he didn't get the win. It was absolutely a victory in my mind. Tom, do you have any thoughts on this?
Nothing too much other than what you guys had said. I think it was the size difference was just stunning. It wasn't always apparent in terms of height or reach. I think Krause is 6'2". He's fairly tall for a guy who fought at lightweight at one point. But when Giles would punch him, even when he was blocking and completely caught the punch on his gloves, it was moving him bodily in very obvious ways. But yeah, for a guy coming off the couch up a weight division from what is already a division above probably his natural weight class, I thought Krause looked amazing. I thought he was going to finish Giles in the first round. Didn't work out for him, but even later in the fight, head movement was very good. He was tagging Giles continually. I think the power differential, the size differential, and the lack of a camp was too much to overcome. But this is a performance and just a brave act of taking this fight in the first place that only boosts James Krause's stock, and I don't think fans will forget it anytime soon.
How about our other Factory X guys in this card? I know you had some thoughts on them. The guys who would normally have the great James Krause in their corner, namely Jonathan Martinez and Yusuf Zalal, fought on the early prelims. And I thought both had really strong performances.
Yeah, two of the more interesting fights on the card overall, I thought. Andre Ewell versus Jonathan Martinez was really a sleeper fight on this card.
It was a banger. It was a great contest.
Ewell, very, very long-armed, very athletic. I really didn't know how Martinez was going to match up against that, but he did extremely well. Fundamentally very, very sound. Exchanging in combination, not getting tagged much. Neither guy really getting tagged much in some of their wild exchanges that they were having at the end of the rounds, just because their punching form is fairly sound. Probably Martinez a little more than Ewell in those instances. One real strength of Factory X fighters that almost all of them have are very nice and very creative knees. And I thought that Martinez used his knees very, very well. In combination in this fight, not just in the clinch, but also long knees at range in the middle of combination. So, I thought he did really well. As for Ewell, he came out starting orthodox, where normally he is a southpaw, and I thought he looked pretty uncomfortable defensively in that position. Once he switched to southpaw, even though it did give Martinez the outside leg kick, the lead leg kick, which he took advantage of, Ewell still looks so much better. You could see his game started to open up as he was landing more jabs. His reach advantage meant that pole countering required, maybe an inch or two of pole to still be able to hit Martinez flush, and he hit a couple of very nice pole counters. Some very nice body work from Ewell in this fight.
Tons of great whipping body shots.
Oh my gosh, yeah, they're just painful. For a guy with arms that long, it's amazing how quickly he can get his fist to the target. Really. Just a great build for MMA. Overall, I thought the 30-27 scorecard for Ewell was insane. But it was a very competitive fight. I don't have a problem with Ewell winning, even though I had it for Martinez. I'd like to see more of both guys.
All right. Well, I think that might be it for this week's episode. If we are, in fact, covering Anderson versus Blachowicz 2, and it's interesting, weird undercard on a bonus episode, then you should find that on the Heavy Hands Patreon. Is that what we're doing, Phil? Does that sound good to you?
Yeah, sounds good to me.
Okay, so go ahead, check out the Heavy Hands Patreon, $3 a month.
One quick note. I do think that if you haven't watched the fight, anybody listening, because it was the first fight on the card, for a relatively short notice UFC debutant, Yusuf Zalal looked very, very good against Austin Lingo.
Oh, he shocked the hell out of me. Austin Lingo, by the way, is he is a Fortis MMA fighter, which scared me when last week on the Vivisection, Zane Simon reminded me of that, and I was like, oh no, he's going to come in with something. He's going to come in with something I don't expect. Instead, it was Zalal who came in and showed remarkable composure under the relentless pressure of a terrifying puncher in Austin Lingo. lots and lots of lateral movement, all the like direction changes and trickery you want to see out of someone who is going to rely that heavily on evasion to win a fight. Great timing with his takedowns. Threw the fuck down when he needed to. So I thought that was also a great performance from another Factory X guy, who is himself, I think, a pretty good cornerman on the rare occasions I've seen him in someone else's corner.
Yeah, he is. And, again, I know we're about out of time, but if there's one thing to kind of look at from that fight in terms of Zalal's creativity, the way he was able to get Lingo in front headlocks and then pull him up off the mat, keep him off the mat from dropping to his knees and land repeated knees to the head. It looked very, very painful, and it was a very nice instance of fight IQ in that one. So, yeah, go watch that fight.
Love a good front headlock game. All right. Well, as I was saying, go check out the Heavy Hands Patreon this week. It's just $3 a month to get our bonus episodes. People, it's nothing. All right. It's nothing. Tom here supports it. He fucking loves it. He loves the Patreon. So,
and we didn't even know that before we invited him on.
Yeah, we didn't even realize there was a severe conflict of interest. No, so go check out the Heavy Hands Patreon this week if you want to see, you want to hear our breakdown of Corey Anderson versus Jan Blachowicz 2. Otherwise, this was a really fun episode. It was a really fun card. Again, one that was sort of overperformed, exceeded my expectations. And the main event was even more compelling than I expected heading in, and I was already quite excited. So, overall, I'm quite happy with UFC 247. Very glad that we got to have you on the show, Tom. Thank you so much for joining us. Let's see. I don't want to get your Twitter handle wrong, but if you want to find Tom on Twitter, he is absolutely, due to his, his maturity and experience, one of the kindest members of the Vaping Scooter Gang. Arguably an honorary member because he's not nearly acerbic enough. But you can find him on Twitter at Moy_cowboy. Is that correct? Tom?
Tom, are you on mute?
Oh my god.
Have we lost you?
Tom's dead.
I'm still on mute. And what I said was so charming and clever. No, that's right. Muay Cowboy, which, if you don't know, Muay Cow means knee fighter, which I am in my extremely unsuccessful amateur kickboxing career. So, there you go.
Beautiful. You can also find his work on the Fight site and on BloodyElbow.com. So, big thanks to Tom for joining us. You can find Phil and I on Twitter as well. I'm at Boxing Bush. Phil is at Evil Greg Jackson. You will find him either by searching that handle or just looking at the replies to any Valentina Shevchenko post. And thank you all again so much for listening. We'll talk to you next week. And if you came here today for the finer points of face punching, you came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands.